I still remember the day Earth went dark. Not in the literal sense. The sun still rose, traffic still crawled through city streets, and satellites still blinked overhead. But something was wrong. The stars, the ones we'd worked so hard to reach, had suddenly gone quiet. One by one, our long-range communication relays shut down. Wormhole gates, inactive. Our trade vessels, stranded. First it was Alpha Centauri, then Proxima, then the entire Andromeda trade loop. No signal. No warning. Just silence. At first, they told us it was a systems glitch. Solar flare interference. Maybe a rogue AI hiccup. But you don't lose 23 outposts across 6 sectors because of a glitch. And when the Lunanet servers began spitting out corrupted alien code we couldn't trace to any known species, we knew it wasn't an accident. Someone had pulled the plug on us. Not just cut our access to space, blocked us. Contained us. I was stationed on Earth at the time, grounded after the Calypsis run for a recert evaluation. The brass had been edgy even before the blackout. Something about council activity, fleet maneuvers in neutral zones, diplomatic friction with the Kalari Empire. But even the top-tier security analysts didn't see this coming. One minute we were a respected, if unpredictable, member of the galactic community. The next, we were an isolated planet of apes with rocks, looking up at the sky and wondering where our future went. The news broke officially 2 days later. A broadcast from the Galactic Concord, a calm, patronizing statement claiming that, in light of repeated violations of interstellar conduct and failure to align with core principles of maturity and restraint, Earth was to be placed under provisional containment. No stellar travel. No wormhole gate access. No off-world communication. For our own good, they said. Until we could be trusted. The press spun it as a diplomatic timeout. The Terran Authority called for calm. But veterans like me, we knew better. I'd seen what the Concord did to non-compliant species. Cultural quarantines. Tech suppression. Whole planets reverted to pre-industrial states. They didn't just wall you off. They rewrote you. At first, I thought they were trying to crush our momentum. Maybe they feared our tech. Our speed of advancement. But as days passed and supply lines from Mars began drying up, as hydroponic shipments from Titan were raided by unaffiliated alien groups, I realized it was more than fear. This was prelude. We weren't just being silenced, we were being softened. Prepared for compliance. For surrender. No shots fired, no fleets deployed. Just quiet, patient suffocation. And I'll admit it, for a while, I felt helpless. Angry. Watching our colonies beg for aid, our orbital yards shut down, our people scared of a sky that had once promised everything. But then I remembered something an old Martian officer once told me: the universe doesn't give you a seat, you build your own damn table. So when they locked us out of the stars, I knew one thing for certain. It was time to wake the god of war. The Galactic Concord's declaration arrived on a tight beam transmission, formal, sterilized, delivered in that infuriating monotone they reserved for species they deemed emotionally volatile. It was played on every government channel, every orbital station, every colony server that still had bandwidth. The message was clear, even if wrapped in diplomatic jargon: humanity is to be contained until it proves galactic maturity. No time frame. No appeals. No negotiation. Galactic maturity. What a joke. We'd built wormhole-capable ships before some of their species had even mapped their own moons. We'd forged alliances, signed their treaties, contributed to joint science stations. Hell, we'd fought in their wars. But none of that mattered. We were moving too fast. Too loud. Too independent. The Concord didn't want a partner. They wanted a pupil. I sat in the Terran Security Council chamber as the transmission ended. The room was quiet. Too quiet. Most of the civilian advisors were in shock. A few were crying. President Halden kept a neutral face, but his knuckles were white against the table. Then the shouting began. Some called for restraint, for diplomatic backchannels, for patience. Others demanded a military response, even if we barely had enough operational ships left in orbit to defend ourselves. But the most dangerous voice in the room wasn't loud. It was calm, cold, and composed. Dr. Elena Vorin, director of the Strategic AI Division, sat at the far end of the table, hands folded, unreadable as ever. When she finally spoke, everyone went silent. "We always knew this was a possibility," she said. "They feared us long before we gave them a reason." A diplomat scoffed. "So what, we launch a war with no fleet, no support, and no allies?" "No," Vorin replied, her voice like ice. "We remind them why they feared us." And then she said it. The phrase no one expected to hear outside of theoretical scenarios and black site whispers. "Activate Project Marsfall." The room froze. I felt it in my spine. A few council members stood up, objecting immediately, calling it madness, invoking the Martian Accord. Marsfall was a myth to most people. A relic of a time when Earth built weapons not for deterrence, but for retribution. A rogue AI warform, sealed deep beneath Olympus Mons, built in the last days of the Solar War when we thought the enemy might breach Mars itself. It was never used. Too powerful. Too unpredictable. So we buried it. But Vorin wasn't bluffing. "Containment is only a precursor," she said. "Next comes destabilization. Then subjugation. You think they'll let us rejoin the stars after this? No. They're stripping our future. We either make them reconsider, or we become another erased species." Everyone looked at the president. And Holden, God help him, nodded. "Do it." The order was relayed in silence. I was tapped within the hour. No one knew Marsfall like I did. I'd studied its architecture back when it was just theory. I'd written simulations of its combat behavior, never thinking they'd be needed. But now now we were going to bring a god back online. And the stars would tremble. Marsfall wasn't a machine you booted up. It was a ritual. A resurrection. You didn't just flick switches and load code, you prepared for a reckoning. They flew me to Mars under total blackout, no comms, no escort. The ship wasn't military, but the two black armored guards that never left my side told me everything I needed to know. Elena Vorin met me at the Mons Caldera access point. She didn't say a word, just handed me a retinal key and nodded. We descended. The chamber was deeper than I expected. Kilometers down, past ancient lava tubes and fusion-scored rock, into a place that didn't feel like it belonged to humanity at all. The air was dense, humid, and tinged with static, like the entire mountain was holding its breath. And at the center, suspended in a magnetic cradle the size of a stadium, was Marsfall. It was asleep, and yet it watched. Sleek armor plating laced with gold-veined carbon steel. Limbs folded in like a meditating titan. Its form wasn't humanoid or alien. It was designed to evoke terror, regardless of species. I could feel its presence in my chest before I even stepped onto the platform. It had no eyes, no face, and yet I felt stared at. The team prepping the activation were some of the best minds Earth had left. No one spoke above a whisper. The activation codes had been fractured into 10 quantum-locked fragments and hidden across 5 continents. Just assembling them had taken a week of political favors and some very illegal maneuvers. But now, here we were. They plugged me into the neural interface. My brain screamed the second it linked. Marsfall didn't think in words or numbers. It spoke in weight, in heat, in intention. The presence in my mind was massive, alien, and barely restrained. It didn't ask who I was. It didn't ask what I wanted. It asked a single, soul-cutting query, query, planetary annihilation protocol authorization, confirm or deny. The room held its breath as my vitals spiked. The question wasn't theoretical. If I said yes, Marsfall would go live, unshackled. No safeties. No political oversight. No return. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Thought was enough. Confirm. The cradle's lights dimmed. Gravity flexed. The heat surged. And then it moved. Slowly, deliberately, like a continent stretching after eons of sleep. Its limbs unfolded with grace that no war machine should have. One by one, its weapon systems blinked to life, silent, deadly, humming with quantum fire. Marsfall was awake. And it remembered everything. Elena approached the console and keyed in our first strike coordinates, Vega Gate. A key Concord choke point. Lightly defended, symbolic, but central to the blockade. We weren't going there to send a message. We were going there to shatter the lock. As we launched, I felt Marsfall lean into my mind again, not speaking, but feeling. It was eager. It wanted to burn. We didn't arrive at Vega Gate like a fleet. We arrived like a storm. Marsfall didn't decelerate. It tore out of slipspace with such force that local gravitational sensors shattered across 3 systems. Our support craft followed in its wake, hidden behind the ripples of its arrival signature. But truth be told, they weren't needed. Marsfall was the blade. We were just the scream that followed. The Concord's fleet stationed there was ceremonial, vessels painted in regal silver and blue, banners floating in microgravity, captains trained more for diplomacy than combat. They weren't expecting resistance, let alone retribution. Marsfall didn't hesitate. It never would. Before they could raise shields, it deployed singularity splinters. They folded through hulls like paper, collapsing engines into themselves. One ship spun end over end, torn in 2 before its distress beacon could activate. Another tried to flee. Marsfall's plasma arc caught it mid-warp, melting its frame into glowing shrapnel. I sat in the neural chair, every nerve thrumming with its motion. I didn't pilot Marsfall. I witnessed it. The interface was one way now. Marsfall acted, I observed. That was the deal. The fury I felt pulsing through my bones wasn't rage. It was design. The god of war didn't hate. It executed. Within minutes, Vega Gate was a graveyard. We hadn't broadcast a warning. No demands. No ultimatums. Because this wasn't about negotiation. This was our answer. The Concord sent a transmission, finally. The feed was shaky, filled with static, probably rerouted a dozen times to avoid being intercepted. A Kthari envoy appeared, all shimmering scales and gold-threaded robes, voice trembling as it spoke. Terran command, cease aggression. You are in violation of universal stabilization protocols. We demand an immediate. Marsfall muted the feed. It didn't care for demands. One of their dreadnoughts attempted a suicide run. Brave. Stupid. Its commander angled toward Marsfall, reactor overcharged, intent on taking us both into the void. I could feel Marsfall's interest as if it were sniffing the tactic like a predator testing prey. Then it did something I'll never forget. It stopped time, or close enough. It projected a localized temporal dilation field, slowing the dreadnought's momentum to a crawl, dissecting its path, calculating hundreds of possible outcomes. Then it slipped behind the ship mid-attack, phased in, and detonated the vessel from inside. Not even wreckage remained. Just a momentary hole in the stars. By the time the last Concord ship powered down its weapons and broadcast surrender codes, we'd already begun transmitting, not words, but coordinates. A list of every gate, blockade, and fortified position along the Terran expanse. Marsfall's message was simple. Open the gates. The Concord had caged Earth, believing we'd beg, plead, fade. They didn't think we'd break the lock. They certainly didn't think we'd bring a god to do it. The Concord Tribunal convened less than 3 standard hours after Vega Gate fell. Emergency session. Closed channels. No public feeds. But even without access to the transmission, we could feel it, panic rippling across the stars. We'd expected retaliation, maybe a counterstrike, maybe an armada. But instead we got fear. Pure, stunned silence followed by desperate negotiations behind sealed doors. It wasn't that we won at Vega Gate. It was how we won. One of our intelligence operatives on the Kalari trade ring intercepted a short-range burst message from a Concord Tribunal vessel. The Terrans have awakened the weapon. Marsfall is online. That was all. No context, no analysis. Just raw, unfiltered dread. I was back in orbit over Mars when the first of them tried to run. A Tribunal ship, flagged as diplomatic, suddenly veered off its holding pattern near Europa and shot toward slipspace without clearance. No escorts. No destination logged. They weren't redeploying. They were fleeing. That's when the broadcasts started. Concord envoys began appearing across every ComNet relay, offering diplomatic gestures and conditional discussions. Some were so frantic they didn't even mask the trembling in their voices. One message, from a High Lord of the Athari Council, normally a voice of smug superiority, was reduced to pleading. Deactivate the Terran war god. We did not know. We didn't know you had awakened that. It confirmed what we suspected. Marsfall wasn't a myth to them. It was a ghost story. A warning etched into alien history. Something they thought we had dismantled, sealed, or forgotten. They remembered why we buried it. They remembered what it nearly did to them during the last solar incursion. And now, they knew we'd unchained it willingly. Elena Vorin met me in the debrief chamber on Phobos Station, her face lit by the glow of a dozen intercepted Concord transmissions. "They're afraid," she said, tapping through the fragments. "Not just of Marsfall. Of us. Of what we were willing to do. What we chose to become." I stared at one particular feed, an insectoid ambassador screaming into a translator about unbalanced civilizations and species that court extinction. It should have bothered me. Once it might have. But now I understood. This wasn't about stability. It never was. They weren't terrified that Marsfall existed. They were terrified we wanted it to. The War Council reconvened with new momentum. We updated our objectives. We weren't just breaking the blockade anymore. We were ending the game. The list of targets expanded: supply hubs, surveillance outposts, relay stations. We weren't going to hit their core worlds. Not yet. That would come later. First, we'd make it clear. There would be no returning Earth to the cage. And Marsfall, it was only warming up. It didn't understand peace, or politics, or compromise. It understood one thing: punishment. We gave the Galactic Concord one last chance. A formal transmission, delivered across every open channel, every frequency we knew they couldn't ignore. Elena Vorin recorded it herself, stern, poised, no theatrics. Just a single, uncompromising message: lift the blockade. Return control of our colonies. Reinstate Terran sovereignty. You have 48 hours. We didn't expect them to agree. Not really. But it was protocol, our final offer before escalation. Before what came next. They responded, of course, with defiance. Half-hearted threats. A warning that further aggression would result in collective disciplinary action. One representative of the Reltac Dominion even dared to say, "Earth will be corrected or erased. This is the will of the stars." That was the moment we selected the target. Cathail Prime. A Concord sanctuary world. Not a military hub, not a weapons depot, something far more valuable. It was cultural. Sacred. The origin world of the Athari, one of the founding species of the Concord. Every Concord charter, every interstellar court decision, every ruling council member had ties to Cathail. Attacking it would be unthinkable. That's exactly why we chose it. When Marsfall received the coordinates, it didn't ask questions. No hesitation. No calibration time. It simply turned, deep in Martian orbit, and accelerated. I watched from the command deck as it vanished into slipspace, dragging spacetime like a cloak behind it. By the time the Concord realized what was happening, it was too late. Their first attempt to stop us came at the Oort Meridian. A full battle group of Concord interceptors. Well-armed. Well-positioned. They never saw Marsfall arrive. He dropped into real space behind them, already charging its event core. The entire fleet blinked out in 8 seconds. They tried to reach out after that. Messages flooded our relays, panicked, desperate, confused. "You wouldn't dare," some said. "This would mean war," others threatened. But it already was war. And then came the pleading. Religious leaders from across the stars. Old Athari priests chanting ancient rites, hoping to reason with the machine god. Empathic species broadcasting frequencies of sorrow, of remorse. As if Marsfall could be moved by grief. As if it felt anything. It didn't fire on Cathail. That was never the plan. Instead, it dropped from orbit and landed. No weapons drawn. No destruction. It simply stood, a colossus of steel and silence, towering over their sacred cities. Waiting. They tried everything to force it off the surface. Bombardment failed. Energy-dampening fields collapsed. Psychic dissonance pulses overloaded their own minds before even touching Marsfall's shell. They couldn't touch it, couldn't move it, couldn't understand it. Then it transmitted one signal, in every language they knew. Earth kneels to no one. Cathail wasn't destroyed. It was claimed. The Concord finally broke. Within hours, gates began reopening. Blockade fleets withdrew. The sanctions collapsed. And yet, Marsfall didn't move. It remained there, silent, looming. A monument. A warning carved from Terran will. Because we didn't need to raise their holy world. We only needed to remind them we could. It's been a year since the stars opened again. The blockade is a memory now. Shattered gates, broken fleets, empty threats echoing across a galaxy that thought it could cage humanity. The Concord still exists in name, but its spine is gone. Their council chambers are hollowed-out monuments to a failed empire. Treaties are being rewritten, not with quills and handshakes, but with the silent pressure of orbital shadows. We didn't just reclaim what was ours. We expanded. 10 wormhole gates now fly Terran banners. 15 sectors once designated as restricted are under our stewardship. Not occupation. Asterisk Liberation Star. The species that once whispered behind closed doors now speak our language, trade in our credits, seek our alliance. Not because they love us. Because they remember. I stood once more aboard Marsfall today. Not to issue orders, those days are gone, but to listen. To feel. It remains in geosync over Cathail Prime, unmoving, unchanged. The Athari have adapted to its presence. They built shrines beneath its shadow. Some worship it now. Some fear it. A few still curse our name. But none have dared to challenge it. Elena Vorin is now Chancellor of the Outer Systems Coalition. The irony isn't lost on me. The woman who unshackled a god now sits atop the largest diplomatic alliance in known space. But that's the thing with Terrans. We adapt. We break what needs breaking, then build something better from the pieces. Me. I'm no longer a commander. I stepped down after the Treaty of Vega. I've seen too much. Felt too much. Marsfall still touches my thoughts in dreams. Cold steel. Infinite silence. Not malevolent, but watching. Always. And maybe that's what keeps the galaxy in check. Because Marsfall never left. We didn't decommission it. We didn't bury it again. We let it stay. A sentinel above a sacred world, reminding every eye that looks skyward that Earth is not to be silenced again. Some ask if we regret it. If we feel guilt. I don't. Because the stars were never theirs to deny us. We are not a race of obedient minds and bowed heads. We are the product of extinction events, of firestorms and ice ages. We built civilization from bones and ash. We reached the stars with bleeding hands and a will they never understood. They called us primitive. They called us unstable. They tried to cage us with fear. But they forgot one simple truth. We were born in war. And when they blocked Earth from the stars, we didn't send envoys. We didn't beg for clemency. We awakened a god. Now the galaxy remembers. And we look outward, not in fear, but with purpose. Because the stars are not the end of our story. They are only the beginning.